The next skill is what I call the +2. And so for the +2, it's going to be an application, a new way of applying what you've already learned to make it sound a little more interesting. So the +2 works with the following skills. So works with these. It works with the roots, works with the octaves. It works with the octaves with the open string. It also works with thirds. It works with tenths. And it works with tenths with open string. So all of these you can use with this +2 skill, okay? And in order for me to demonstrate this for you, I have to kind of give you an extended root map here, or the scale. Remember, this was what we originally learned, but when we were learning tenths, we expanded this so that you can play more on the roots on the A string. So I'm going to do that now. So by now you should have the scale down pretty well. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we have 7 down here. Well, I'm going to extend this 7 to here. So that's another 7. And then the 1, another 1 is right here. And then I'm going to extend this down from 4. Instead of going to 3 here, I'm going to also add a 3 here. And then this open A string would be a 2 in this G form. Okay, so now I have multiple options on playing 3s, 7s, and 1s. So this is how it works. I'll change the color so you know. This might be a little hard to see, but it's all right. Okay, so here's the chord. So whenever you play a chord, let's say chord 1, okay? Normally you would play, let's go with thirds, okay? So normally you would play this 1 here, and then you would play this third here, these two together. I'll just highlight them over, okay? But +2 skill means you can actually play the same thirds of the chord +2. So instead of just the 1, if you add +2 or add 2 to 1, that's a 3. So over the 1 chord, you can play this one, or you can play the thirds of what the 3 chord would be. So you can play this or this, and it will still work. Here's another example. Let's say the chord is a 4 chord. So over the 4 chord, normally if you're playing thirds, you would play those two. But if you use this +2 skill, you would add 2 to 4, which is 6. So you would go and play what you would play on this normally for the 6 chord, which would be that, because you remember it's a minor triad for 6, because 6s are minor chords. But you can use this 4 major thirds, or you can add 2 and play the 6, which is a minor, and they'll both work over the 4 chord. How cool is that? All right, let's do another example. This time let's do a 5 chord. Now for this example, I'm going to use the tenths. And you remember you can use with the open string or just tenths. Both of them will work. But the 5 chord using tenths looks like this. So I can either just play that over a 5 chord, or I can +2. 5 + 2 is a 7. Now you remember the 7 is a diminished, which uses a minor third or minor tenth. So I can play this or I could play the minor 10th of the 7, and they will both work. Okay? What's even cooler than that is, check this out. So I'm going to go back now. Let's go back to the 4 chord. Okay? So I'm going to use tenths, but it works with all of these. Remember, octaves, tenths, anything. So I can go and play your normal 4 chord tenths. And then I plus 2, which means I can play the 6 tenths. That looks like this. But in going from the 4 to the 6, you can actually use this next, the chord in between, to go from one to the other. So that means I can use 5 as like a stepping stone, but the 5 is a major chord. You got to know your theory, and it would use a major 10th pattern. So I can go, let's say we're just camping on the 4 chord. I can go from the 4, use the 5 chord to go to the 6th chord. How cool is that? And that works with all these chords, major or minor. So I'll give you another example here. I know I'm going, some of you hopefully will already get this, but I want to make sure you understand this before you apply it, because it's a very, very useful technique. Let's say a 3 chord, which doesn't come up too much. So I'm going to play the tenths. We'll do tenths. Or no, let's go back to thirds, okay? Because I want to give you all these examples. So thirds would be a minor pattern is this, over the 3 chord. But if you plus 2, that takes 3 plus 2 is 5, which is a major third. So over the 3 chord, I can play either this or this. But I can also use the chord in between, which is 4, which is a major triad, to go from the 3 to the 5. 3, use 4 to go to the 5. Use 4, go back to the 3. All over the 3 chord. Now remember, these are not, I'm not talking about changing when you see the chord change. I'm talking about changing while you're supposed to only be on the 3 chord. So this gives you a lot of movement even though the chord stays the same, which makes it a lot more interesting. Okay? So if you have that, then you're ready for the next step. So here is what's even cooler. So remember, there are 3 major chords. 1, 4, and 5. These are the 3 major chords in the progression. So for these, you can add the plus 2 and move up, meaning you can go from, if it's a 1 chord, you can play 1 and a 3 chord because that's plus 2. For the 4 chord, you can play 4 or the 6 because that's plus 2. 5, you can play 5 or the 7 because that's plus 2. Well, for the minor, the 3 minor chords, which are 2, 3, and 6. We're going to leave 7 out right now, even though this works with 7 as well, but we'll just kind of focus on this. When you play a chord 2, 3, or a 6, you can use plus 2, and then you can add plus 2 again to that. Let me show you what I mean. So for a 2 chord, let's say, and we'll just use this. So let's say it's a 2 chord here. You can play a 2 minor, which would be, I'm going to use tenths. It would be that 2. If you were to add 2 to that, you would get 4, which would be 4 is a major, which would be this. These two are together. And you can add one more step of 2. So 4 plus 2 is now 6. 6 is a minor, so you can add this. So over a 2 chord, you can play this grouping of tenths. You can use this grouping of tenths, or you can use this grouping of tenths, and they will all sound good. Okay? And once again, going from each one of these, there's a chord in between. You can use those as passing chords to get to one to the other and back and forth. So this way, especially songs that are slow and they stay on one chord for a long time, it can kind of get boring staying on just one chord. This will allow you to add some creative lines that connect chord to chord within one chord. Okay? And once again, this works with all of these: roots, octaves, octaves with open, thirds, tenths, tenths with open. They all work. However, in the modern worship sound, using octaves while with the open string and tenths with the open string, it will sound really cool to do this. Okay? So I hope you got that last part, the minors. Let me write this. Minor chords. These are major chords. The major chords you can add +2 and get to, the next chord. The minor, you can do that 2 times. So for 3, one more example, that would mean you can play the 3 chord using any one of these, add 2. You can use the 5 chord, and you can add 2 again, which would mean the 7th chord, and they will all work over this 3 chord.